So with that, today we're going to talk about the InformaCast Paging Adapter. So this one is going to be a kind of building off what we went over last week, because really the InformaCast Enabled Paging Adapter is the SIP paging adapter with, how I like to refer to it, the InformaCast cherry on top, where it's got all the same functionality that the regular SIP version would have, but it also comes with the little InformaCast functionality built into it. So just to kind of go over, brief updates like we did last time, of course, since it's using the same hardware platform as the new paging adapter, there are going to be some hardware updates. So we changed out, the processor, we added more memory, there's more storage space, and of course the physical potentiometer has been removed. However, we have not populated the digital potentiometer option, so there is currently no potentiometer for the line-in audio, although we never really got requests from customers to use that or make any adjustments for it, so it really should be transparent to the end user. That was something that we never really got mentioned in support. One other notable change is we have changed the label. I'm not certain how recent this change has been. I know this is something that we discussed with Single Wire. They wanted us to remove the label that we had on the prior versions where it said the Single Wire paging adapter, and Single Wire is the company, InformaCast is the software. So it led to some confusion with support from customers where they would call Single Wire looking for support on our product, and they'd say, no, it's a CyberData product. And they said, no, it's right here on the label. It says it's a Single Wire product. So we've changed over the label, and now all the labels and the web interface will show the InformaCast Enabled Paging Adapter, just so that way customers will know that it's a complete CyberData product. For the software updates, again, no real changes as compared to the older version that we had. The only minor changes that we have, of course, the multicast priority has changed to read 0 through 9 instead of 9 to 0. So it's just a little presentation change. There's no actual functional change. Priority 9 is still the highest priority, and priority 0 is still the lowest priority. SIP calls are still treated as priority 4.5. So no change in functionality, just a change in presentation. And of course, the configuration template has changed. This was a major change. This is a change that we made when we went to the new platform, where we changed some of the tags and fields in the XML file to be more in line with the database that we use to actually store the configuration file. So with that, we had to change from more, human understandable tag names, where things were, say, like for the audio codec that we would use. In the older versions, we would literally use the name of the codec, PCMU, PCMA, G722. Now it's literally numbers that correspond to a table, where 0 is PCMU, 1 is PCMA, just to make it more easily understandable and usable in our database. It's more of a developer convenience change over a user convenience change. It's just easier on our end, which makes it a little bit faster to pull up all the different settings. So to go over the front, of course, you can see here on the right-hand side, we've got our, I'm going to go ahead and minimize this so I can actually see it. We've got our old version here, of course, the Single Wire paging adapter. This is an older picture. I think this is from like 2015 or 2016. So we might have stopped shipping with this label a while ago. But that's how it used to look. And of course, we had our physical potentiometer right there in the front. And on the left here, we have our new version that just has this nice InformaCast Enabled Paging Adapter and the nice little CyberData logo on the bottom. I think it looks a lot cleaner, looks a lot better. And then, of course, we've got the back version of it. No physical changes. Of course, you'll see the arrangement of the connections has changed. On the left, the RCA line in and line outs have kind of shifted a little bit more to the left. And the ground strap is right next to the RTFM button, actually just kind of vertically above the two instead of being right next to each other horizontally like we saw in the old one. And we still kept the external power connector option that uses the 48-volt DC power supply. So that's good options there. Really no functional changes for the end customer. It should be completely transparent going from the older version to the new version. So to go over use cases for the product, this is kind of designed as a simple SIP, multicast, or InformaCast to analog interface where it can use any of those options either independently. It can, of course, only take SIP if for some reason they wanted to get the InformaCast version and only make phone calls to it. They can do that. They can also only take multicast or only take InformaCast, or it can use all three together. So it gives a really, really good option for end customers to go and interface with their existing analog hardware. They can use the InformaCast to send kind of pre-canned messages to not only our system, but also to the phones and even mobile phones with InformaCast Fusion. They can actually send text messages and text updates to phones. It's pretty cool software. And then where multicast would tie in there is multicast kind of becomes a redundant backup, where if for some reason their InformaCast system goes down, but their network is still up, they can still send messages across the network with multicast. And of course, they can still pick up a phone and call it, assuming that they've got it registered with a different phone system. So for the different connection points, we've got our 600 ohm balanced tel output, and that's going to be our page port connection, specifically pins 3, 4, and 5, our positive, negative, and ground connections. Then we've got the 10,000 ohm unbalanced RCA output. And the RCA output's a little bit more for modern amplifiers. You will still see some of the kind of older ones, although when I say, those kind of older new ones, they're like mid 2000s, where the tel input is pretty much used anywhere from, old Duquesne stuff that you get, in the late 80s, early 90s to even modern stuff you could buy today. So with those two connection points, we can connect to just about anything. And then, of course, we've got the RCA input that's, since it's an RCA connection, it's still going to use our 10,000 ohm unbalanced RCA input, of course, mainly useful for background music, although you could integrate a radio system into it. I've worked with a couple schools that have used their regular walkie-talkies that they'll issue to like yard supervisors to actually plug into the paging system, and through different capabilities on their little handheld radios, they can actually initiate an announcement over their radio system. So pretty useful in certain events, but that's pretty rare to get that level of complexity with the RCA line, and typically it's just used for background music if it's even used at all. So when we pull in InformaCast to this, we kind of have to go over InformaCast a little bit. So InformaCast is an emergency notification suite, and that's kind of a big picture name where InformaCast is really designed for emergency notification from the ground up, where it was mainly designed to go and send audio or text-based notification to different IP endpoints across the network. And that can be anything from, say, like our speakers or our paging adapter, of course, to actually go and play those audio messages. But some other companies in the industry actually have dot matrix displays that they'll pair with speakers to actually show text-based notifications. So say in the event of a tornado or a fire or other type of natural disaster or warning, they can not only send an audio announcement, but a visual announcement in the form of text that'll get displayed in kind of a scrolling dot matrix where the message will kind of scroll across that dot matrix screen. So it's extremely useful. Typically, we'll see the InformaCast deployed to larger enterprise customers, typically mainly because it's paired with Cisco Call Manager, commonly referred to as CUCM, Cisco Unified Call Manager. And the main reason with that is when InformaCast, Single Wire's InformaCast first got started, it was kind of bundled together with Cisco Call Manager, and it was actually limited to only work with Cisco Call Manager for a pretty long time. And it was just kind of a bundled thing where if you actually went out and got Cisco Call Manager, it just came with InformaCast, where you could go in and basically try it out for 90 days to do just general paging. And then if you wanted to go and, of course, pay for the InformaCast service, then you could go and get more flexibility out of it, or it would just return to the normal free version, where I believe you got up to 50 different speakers that you could make announcements from. So it ended up being a pretty nice bundle that came with Cisco Call Manager. But because of that, it kind of got limited to more of our medium and enterprise level businesses, just because of the price point to get in with Cisco Unified Call Manager. Your small little mom and pop shops, with a couple phones and, maybe one or two speakers, they're not going to they're not going to need the complexity that Cisco Call Manager offers. Plus, they're not going to want to pay that much for a phone service when they could go to something like Ring Central. But where we will see this used is much larger enterprise level companies, companies on par with, like Cisco, or of course Cisco's going to use their own service, but things like Facebook, or just giant kind of big companies, or universities are another big player with that. One little side tangent is I was going to go to Cal State San Jose, and going through the sign up process, I had to give them my phone number, and I got added into their notification group from their InformaCast server. So I constantly get emergency notifications if there's an earthquake up in the San Jose area, or there's a shooter in the area, or anything like that, or a fire. I get notifications all the time on my phone, and I can't figure out how to opt out of it. But they use InformaCast, so it's just kind of funny. But it's mainly used in the school environments, and really just with those enterprise level customers, just because of the price point to get in with it. But to actually trigger messages through InformaCast, they can be really triggered by 2 or 3 different ways. 3 is kind of a newer option, but mainly 2 different options. Of course, through the web interface, although it's not super duper often for customers to go through and trigger it through the web interface, because you basically have to be, sitting at a computer, and you have to go through a couple different windows to actually go and trigger it, where you have to pick the message that you want to send, and then you have to pick the group that you want to send it to. So that's not super typical. I think it'll definitely get used in some areas where, if you've got a secretary sitting at a desk, that, she could go and quickly trigger one of those messages. But predominantly how it gets used is by calling. And the way that it'll work through a call, I've got the kind of example, I've got it way down the ways. But the way that it'll get triggered through a call is they'll set kind of like a trunk number or a prefix number. And by dialing that prefix, like at CyberData, how you have to dial 9 to dial out? Yeah, 9 to dial out. You have to dial a prefix, which basically tells Cisco Call Manager that they want to route the call to InformaCast. And with that prefix, it'll go and basically strip that out. And then whatever number follows the prefix, it will pick that predetermined message. And the message would just be linked to that particular prefix. So that's typically how those InformaCast messages are triggered. So how the paging adapter plays with InformaCast is we actually register in InformaCast as what's known as an IP speaker. And this terminology, IP speaker, is synonymous with any kind of speaker that would register with InformaCast. And things that register with InformaCast are basically any product, even sometimes phones technically, or things like our strobe, or in this case, our InformaCast paging adapter. Everything is an IP speaker in the InformaCast world, even though they're not technically an IP speaker like we would refer to it as. And once they're registered in there, they get entered into a different message group. And these are just groups that they can go and receive messages at. They're basically just different groupings, and think of those as kind of your zones. It could be, dorm floor 1, dorm floor 2, an entire dorm building, the science building, stuff like that. They kind of zone them in different manners like that. And one speaker can be in multiple groups. And when a message is actually sent to them, in our case, kind of restricting to the paging adapter, once we receive that particular message, of course, an audio-based message, if we get a text-based message, we obviously can't do anything with a text-based message. But if we get an audio-based message, we'll play it through both our analog outputs. This works concurrently with both SIP and multicast. So typically how they'll end up using it is they'll use SIP for voice paging. So if they need to make an announcement, they'll call it up through Cisco Call Manager. Or if they're using InformaCast Fusion, which is the cloud-based version of InformaCast, which allows people on other phone systems to actually use InformaCast, they can trigger it through there. So they can still basically just pick up a phone and make an announcement through the paging adapter. That still functions. And sometimes they'll still want to use multicast, because multicast can be that kind of redundant backup paging. Of course, if they've got multicast, or if they've got InformaCast, InformaCast is much, much more powerful than multicast is, because InformaCast can go across the open internet. So that way everything doesn't have to be on the same physical local area network like they would be for multicast. So that's one of the problems that we get with multicast. However, InformaCast doesn't have that problem because it was designed for enterprise level. So it can work across multiple different sites. So if for some reason the InformaCast system goes down, but the actual network itself is still up and running, say they've got the InformaCast system offsite at one of their server farms for say a big university, but the local system is still working at the university, their internet just went down, they can still make announcements across because the local network is working. They just can't talk to the outside world. So in that case, they could still use multicast to get out that emergency notification during that time. So it's a useful backup, but it's nowhere near as powerful as InformaCast is. So when we go through and trigger a message through the web interface, to just kind of walk through the steps, somebody would have to log into InformaCast and they would have to pick the message that they want to play. They would pick the group that they would want to receive it and click send. So it's really, really easy to actually trigger it through the web interface of InformaCast. It's a little time consuming and requires, a computer to be in front of, but it's really easy to set up. So to trigger it through a phone.
Paul?
Yes.
It's Laurel. Dan had a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't have my all my pop-ups.
No problem. I'll let you know if people have questions, but Dan had one.
Question would be, if multicast can do everything that SIP and, if InformaCast can do everything that multicast and SIP can do, why would somebody choose SIP or multicast? Why not just choose InformaCast and cover all three? And ironically, the InformaCast is priced at $415, and if you just do a quick number reversal, the SIP paging adapter is $514. You just moved the two outer numbers around. So I was kind of curious, what would be the reason then of not selling InformaCast all the time?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a good question. So, of course, to actually utilize InformaCast, they have to have the InformaCast server already there. So, of course, we're kind of limiting to, what customers can actually deal with the InformaCast system is they already have to have InformaCast. And, of course, we're dealing with the larger enterprise customers there. But maybe I wasn't exactly clear when I was going through InformaCast and SIP. InformaCast, it is technically possible to make a regular voice announcement, but it's a little bit more difficult. It requires what's known as SIP via InformaCast, where the devices actually have to register to InformaCast as a phone. It's a little bit more difficult to set up, what I like to refer to as more of an advanced setup. So it's a little bit harder for people to do, and it's not, I think we've only dealt with 1 or 2 schools that have actually gone and implemented that. Typically, when they're using InformaCast, it's just a way for them to do canned messages, essentially. It's a smarter canned message system, where it is possible to do what the InformaCast world calls ad hoc paging, where they can actually go and make voice announcements with it. But they can also do SIP as well. And sometimes it's a little bit easier to do it through SIP, where they just have to, pick up and dial, extension 123 and make their voice announcement, instead of having to dial 9 and then dial 1 for ad hoc and then pick your zone. So you have to press less buttons. It becomes a user training issue, but they can both accomplish the same thing.
Would a price savvy person say, hey, if this is also a SIP paging server, I can save $100 by buying it over an InformaCast and not worry about InformaCast?
Yeah, that definitely could happen. People could go and do their price comparisons and see what would be the better option for them. But they'd be good. They'd be
functionality.
Not necessarily. I mean, the one cool feature that you get with InformaCast is the fact that it can span the wide area network. So if somebody's got, a big university, or maybe a better example would be a big enterprise level company where they've got sites all across the country, they could go and make an emergency announcement, or say, say like they had their 1 millionth customer, and think like Jiffy Lube as an example. They could go and make an announcement across all their places across the country all at once, saying, hey, we just had our 1 millionth customer, such and such, they get, this big prize. They can do that all congruently, where you cannot do that with SIP and you cannot do that with multicast. So you get kind of special cool features like that when you're dealing with InformaCast that you wouldn't necessarily get with SIP or multicast.
But if all I wanted to do was SIP, could I buy the InformaCast for $100 less and get all the functionalities of the SIP paging server?
Well, the SIP paging server is a little different. We don't have a SIP, an InformaCast enabled paging server. We've only got the InformaCast enabled paging adapter, so it only receives.
Okay.
We don't have something that combines the multicast. I should have been more clear there. You know, when I was referencing multicast, it was only multicast receive, not multicast transmit. So I apologize if that was unclear.
Well, it may not be. I mean, I'm still learning as I go here, so you may have said it and I may not have absorbed it. But thank you.
No, yeah, I know for a fact I didn't explicitly state that. So that's good information. Thank you, Dan. Thank you for that. Thank you for that question. I think that was informative for everybody else too. You know, because that's definitely something I didn't cover there. But so to continue here, how you actually trigger a message through a phone. When somebody wants to go and trigger a message through a phone, there's several hoops that they have to jump through beforehand. You know, to actually be able to do this, they have to set up a trunk in between InformaCast and their phone system, typically Cisco Call Manager. So they have to get all that set up, and it's a relatively easy process to set up if somebody's fairly well versed in Cisco Call Manager and dealing with trunks, and especially with the newer version of InformaCast, or in the newer version of Cisco Call Manager, excuse me. They've added in kind of what they'll typically refer to in the software world as a wizard, where it'll walk you through different steps where you only have to fill out you know, specific information like the address of the server and then the administrator username and password, and Cisco Call Manager can basically create the entire trunk for you. So that way you don't have to have, you know, the years worth of experience with Cisco Call Manager to be able to figure out how to do that. So it's a pretty trick feature that they have in there. But once the once both the phone system, Cisco Call Manager or others, and InformaCast can talk, it's pretty easy to go and set up. So what they'll need to do to actually trigger the message, of course, after associating the message with a particular number to dial, they would just pick up any phone that's allowed to page, dial the prefix number, and just to kind of keep everything pulled back to what we know at CyberData, we have to dial 9 to dial out. So let's just think you have to dial 9 to dial to InformaCast. And then they dial 1, 2, 3 for the message that corresponds to that particular message and group. So they dial 9, 1, 2, 3, and that plays the message 1, 2 to group 3. So it just makes it really, really easy to go and trigger it that way. That's predominantly how a lot of customers will end up using it. Again, mainly for that pre-canned message, although some can use it for what they call ad hoc paging, which is synonymous with just a regular voice page, where they just pick it up, hey, you know, Bill, you know, your lunch is here. You know, when they want to just make a regular voice announcement, they can do that as well through InformaCast. So other ways to trigger the InformaCast messages are, of course, our soon to be released InformaCast Wi-Fi button. That'll be coming out pretty soon. The other option is something that was new that I actually kind of researched a little bit over the weekend that was added in the new version of Cisco 12.01, which is what they call the panic button feature. And it actually utilizes the same kind of high-level process of how our Wi-Fi button is going to work with Cisco Call Manager, with what's known as an SNMP trap, a standard network mail protocol message. So basically, in our case, with the Wi-Fi button, when they go and press that Wi-Fi button, we send an SNMP message to InformaCast, and they're basically just listening for those messages. They receive it and then do whatever action they're supposed to do based on the configuration and what's in that particular message. And the Cisco Call Manager panic button feature works exactly the same. But the panic button one is exclusively limited to things, to actual soft keys on a phone. So it's more useful for things, say like I don't know, some different school administration people, where they can just have a particular soft key, like a counselor, as an example. You know, they're dealing with somebody and they get a little upset or irate. They can, you know, just kind of discreetly press the panic button that would appear on their soft keys on their phone, and it would send that message to InformaCast, and the message would do it there. So it's not going to be a direct competitor with our Wi-Fi button, because we're, of course, going to have a physical button, and the panic button feature of Cisco is going to be restricted to only using phones. So it's not really going to be a direct competitor there, but we'll use the same kind of functionality to actually go and trigger the message. excuse me, we're both going to be using that SNMP message. So the next thing that we need to cover is how to actually connect the InformaCast paging adapter to InformaCast. You know, because that's the biggest thing. You know, we can talk about what the dang thing does, but connecting it to the service is almost more important. So the recommended way that both single wire and we recommend for customers to actually go and connect the paging adapter to InformaCast is a protocol known as SLP, Service Location Protocol. And this basically creates a plug and play option for the customers. Like Mauricio always says, it gives them the option to plug it in like a toaster and it just works, assuming their network's set up properly, where they can literally plug it in and the devices will connect to the network. And when they connect in, they'll typically reach out to the DHCP server, so that way they can get their IP address, so that way they can do stuff on the network. And as they go through the boot up process and they're getting all of the programs ready on the device, our device or any of our competitors, they'll send out that SLP message. And the message just goes out across the network to anybody that can pick it up, but it's specifically looking for an InformaCast server. And the InformaCast server receives that SLP message and then responds to us and says, hey, we're at this location. This is how you reach our configuration files. So then we send our request to the server, and then the server responds back with either a specific file that's created specifically for us or just a generic speaker configuration file. And then we populate with everything we need to, we finish booting up, and the device is ready to go. So this is, of course, the process that's recommended by single wire just because it's so easy. It's literally plug and play. Where you just basically plug it in, it detects the server, appears in the server. It literally appears when you pull up the speaker page, it shows a new device detected. And right there, you'll see the new device's MAC address that you just added, the time, and the IP address of the device. So it makes it super duper easy where you just go in and you say, okay, this MAC address and IP address, this is our InformaCast paging adapter. And you name it, you add it into whatever groups you need to. So it makes it really, really easy for everybody. That's why it's the recommended option, because it's literally plug and play. The other option, because sometimes there are environments where SLP won't be enabled, and environments like that are where you're dealing with kind of a complex network setup, where they've got their servers in a different subnet, and without getting too deep into the network, sometimes SLP just doesn't work sometimes, depending on how they have everything set up. So a feature that we added, I think with the, first it was with the InformaCast speakers, but we added in an option to physically set the InformaCast server address. And this appears on the device page, and it's literally called the InformaCast server address. So it's really, really easy, and this is on any of our products. It's on the speakers, it's on the strobes, it's on the intercoms, and of course it's on the paging adapter. So this one's ideally used only if and when SLP isn't enabled. SLP is, of course, the easiest way to go because it's plug and play and just makes it super duper easy. But if that's not possible, they'll have to go and manually point to it. And they'll use that InformaCast server address field. So what they'll have to do in the actual field itself, and this is a common question that we always got in support, is we'd have customers call up and say, hey, like I can't use SLP on my network. I'm trying to connect my speaker to InformaCast, and I plugged in the InformaCast server address, and it's not registering. Well, then we tell the customer, hey, you see the little toggle help button? Yeah, press that. Okay, mouse over the question mark, and then it tells you, okay, if you want to use this, you need to specify the full address, which I've got just listed here. And this is actually what, this is actually what they'll need to input here. They actually have to go and put HTTP://. Of course, they don't want to put InformaCast IP server IP address here. This is just for us, but they would just put whatever the IP address is of the server. The server specifically listening, because we've got the little colon here. This designates the port. So this is basically just the address and then the particular port, and this is a hard set port where they always take this port. And then it's just in the InformaCast and resources folder. And this just reaches where the actual configuration file is. So this is really useful in cases where they're not able to use SLP on the network, where they basically just point to the server and we can go in there and grab everything. So that makes it's kind of a backup option. It's more for those cases, again, where, of course, SLP isn't enabled. It will work. It's not the ideal way to do it, but it'll still get you to point B.
Thank you for watching this edition of CyberSchool. If you have any questions, please get in contact with our sales department. They are available by email at sales@cyberdata.net or by phone at 831-373-2601 extension 334. Please make sure to like this video and subscribe for more content like this from CyberData.